Person-centered practices in action has been an incredibly positive experience for our family. My son Andy is 30 years old now, but 10 years ago when we created his future plan, he really did know what he wanted from life. We had worked really hard to expose him to a number of things and offer him a lot of opportunities to see what people did with their lives and to teach him what self-determination meant. But unfortunately, because of the rigidness of the system, where we lived and his abilities, we really weren't able to make any of his dreams come true 10 years ago. We really worked hard on employment with Andy and did a few other things in an attempt to kind of help him put himself in a better position to realize his dreams. But it eventually led to a depression and a couple of really dark years. When Andy came back to us and we got started again, person-centered practices had become more a way of doing things than not. And this was very different than when it was the first time around. And we worked really hard to help Andy understand his role in deciding what he wanted for his life, that it was his decision, not ours, and made certain that his team grew and surrounded him in a way that for the first time we could really make things happen. Now he's working at a local biomedical firm in a biohazard recycling lab. I would never have thought he could do that, so that's where presumed competence comes in. He's living in an apartment with a living caregiver for 2 years, and we're pretty sure by the end of those 2 years that he'll be able to do so by himself. He has the girlfriend that he wanted so desperately. They have a lovely relationship, and because he has transportation now that's more flexible, they're able to see each other more often than he had been able to in the past. I think one of the biggest things for me as his mom and guardian is that he's able now, because of having an ABLE account, to save his home money. And so what he makes, he gets to keep, and he gets to enhance his life, not support the system with that money. And for the first time, he's come to understand the value of resources and the role they play in recognizing his dreams. And just like all the rest of us would feel, we've really replaced the box, I think, of service delivery with a dream. And I think without person-centered planning and a real commitment to listening actively to what Andy wants in his life, it's actually happened. So as a family, we celebrate that daily. And I'm so very thankful that he is experiencing this because of some of the work that we do at ICI. That makes it doubly wonderful. We all learn the most from having real life experience. And Andy lives with autism, and individuals living with autism really need the experience to fully feel informed and competent about decisions. I think having strength-based models, which person-centered planning is, really pushes away that whole concept of you're just a vulnerable adult, and we should take care of you. By presuming competence, Andy's team put him into that biohazard lab with device work that I would never have thought he could have done himself. So I was pushed there too. And we all offer our kids opportunity to take risks. That's how we know that's how they learn. And yet individuals with disabilities, it feels as though there's a different standard, that we've been taught that they're vulnerable and they're not capable. And so traditionally, that's where we work from, instead of starting with, no, they're very capable. They have the same skills and strengths all of us do, and why wouldn't we start there? I think the tipping point, this is actually a little bit of a deficit model thing. Andy desperately wanted to live by himself or with a peer or his girlfriend, and wanted to work in a competitive integrated setting. And his waiver wouldn't cover the support he needed for both. And so he had to move into a group home, and he ended up getting his job through a team. It's still a great job, but that's how it had to happen. And when we started to talk about how the group, I think he came to fully appreciate that he wasn't able to live a person-centered life as he had been taught he was supposed to have, because he was living with two other guys, and if they didn't want to do something he did, he couldn't do it. So he lost a lot of his activities. They were in a rural community, so the transportation wasn't good, so he actually had to quit things like Special Olympics, some things that were in his faith-based thing that he did on Thursday nights he had to give up for a while. And I think that helped him understand the difference between living a self-determined life and leading a systems-based life. And from there, he was the one that said, I need to leave the group home, and I need to live closer to transportation. And he found those things out for himself instead of us trying to convince him of that. And so to me, that was the tipping point. And once it started, it actually went really fast. He had watched his brothers and sisters grow up and reach their dreams. He's still holding on to that idea of being a minister. That's one of his global dreams. But he's in a very good place, and things are looking extremely promising. For he and the young man who's his roommate, I think they learn as much from each other as Andy learns from him. So that's pretty cool too. I don't think Darren would mind me mentioning his name. We found him on a site called Roomie, where they match individuals who are looking for roommates and those who are with others that are looking for roommates. And I think one of the things that was really neat is he really likes to work out. He likes to do many of the same things that Andy does. And it was interesting because the only thing he didn't do very well was cook. So Andy, because he does like to cook, has taught him a few things. Andy's done some speaking recently about person-centered practices, and he brought up the fact that Darren lives on cereal, and Andy said, my mom won't let me do that. And, so they have this really cool friendship, and yet Darren, and when I approached him at the beginning about, do you understand your role here, or do you have questions about this? Because it's relatively a new model. And he said, no, he said, I understand that I'm here to work with Andy so that I can work myself out of a job. And I said, yes, and you're part of a team. It's not only entirely up to you, but you play an important piece in that. And he's respectful. And the thing that's so nice is that we're not worrying about turnover nearly as much because his room and board is paid for, and that really, he has a full-time job otherwise, so he's making a good living and still doing this work, which he really enjoys. And we've never been in a position where we haven't lost folks. The workforce is so in crisis that we didn't, and we have lost others that have helped staff Andy's needs, but the stableness of Darren being there has really made this a much easier transition for Andy, and continues to, I think. His experience had been with someone who had had physical disability, and he had never really understood autism or had a chance to really learn about autism. And I had warned him in our interview, I said, Andy can be very difficult to live with if you don't have some of the skills to redirect if he's talking about something that's really important and very boring to you. If he wants to talk about the same things over and over again, we talked about the need for schedules, and I know you are pushing him to be independent, but you have to realize that his schedule is the foundation for him being willing to be flexible. And so those were the things that we had to work on. And we still, they've been together now a year, and we're still working on that piece because he still tends to err on, I shouldn't have to tell Andy what time we're going someplace or what everything we're doing all week. But as long as Andy knows what the plan is, he can be very flexible within the plan. But he has to have that foundational plan, and that's not instinctual if you've never been with someone with autism. But he's been great about it and willing to learn and not afraid to ask questions. And he and Andy have done some speaking together. And it's fun to hear Darren talk about WIOA and the Olmsted plan, and then Andy talk about how that fit for him. So that combination is really neat. I think the one thing I would suggest to individuals working as DSPs would be to try to remember that the individuals that they're helping support are people just like them. They need to be respected the same way, and they're entitled to an ordinary life just like the rest of us. So you're not being really hired as a caregiver. You're being hired to support someone being independent. And that does mean a little risk, and it does mean giving them the benefit of the doubt. And I know for my son, it's made all the difference in the world. Andy's no longer a child, and Andy has proven that we should presume competence, that he is very capable. I think sometimes because he grew up in a very deficit model disability world, it's easy for us to get overly protective and to step back and say, no, this is taking it too far. We've had to deal with, he and his girlfriend have brought some challenges that way. And when I get to that point, I remember stopping and thinking and saying, yes, but he deserves, person-centered practices tell us he deserves to be able to determine his own realities, his own dreams. It is our job to help him maintain the balance between what's important to him with what's important for him. And just like anyone in their young adulthood, we don't always agree about that. But I didn't with my other kids either. But the being grounded in person-centered practices always reminds us that we need to first and foremost think about what that person wants. Have we given them an informed opportunity for informed choice? Because Andy needs to hear information differently than my other kids would have. And then assuming that he has the information he needs, try to let him self-determine what comes next. So I think I've always practiced person-centered, I've always done person-centered practices. It's my mind state as an educator. But I think since working at ICI and really learning deeply about the tools and some of the research behind this, I think it's just become simply a way of life for us in our home now. And I really hope that Andy takes that with him too, because I think that's where his confidence comes from now, is that he really matters.